Okay, welcome to you all. Thank you for coming out, and welcome to the Monday, March 26, 2018 regular meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're pleased that you're all here with us this evening, and I would ask, if I could, to ask you to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder is on his way back from a work trip and said he may make it here, but he's not here now. Mr. Z?
Here.
And Mayor Torter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Now, why don't we go on and move on to the meeting agenda? Do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda?
I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. We do have some special proclamations. Some of you were recently at the dedication of Pinwheel Garden, which we just did a few minutes ago, once again this year, which has become a great tradition. And so we have some proclamations relating to that, which will be coming up shortly. And I guess I would ask Ms. Hardy and Vice Mayor Conley if they would do the honors of reading those proclamations. But anyway, why don't we start with the proclamation declaring April as Child Abuse Prevention Month. Do we know who? Oh, you need the proclamation? Okay. All right. Nancy, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Whereas child abuse and neglect is a serious problem affecting every segment of any community, and whereas effective child abuse prevention programs succeed because of the meaningful partnerships created among families, human services agencies, schools, faith communities, civic organizations, law enforcement agencies, and the business community. Whereas protective factors such as nurturing and attachment, knowledge of parenting and of child and youth development, parental resilience, social connections, concrete supports for parents, and social and emotional competence of children are conditions that reduce or eliminate the incidence of child abuse and neglect and promote the social, emotional, and developmental well-being of children. And whereas pinwheels are whimsical and fun, just like a childhood should be, and the planting of a pinwheel garden represents the happy, healthy childhood all children need to survive. And whereas witnesses of child abuse and neglect should report it to Child Protective Services at 703-324-7000.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2018 as Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month in the City of Falls Church, and urge all residents to recognize this month by dedicating ourselves to the task of improving the quality of life for all children and families, thereby preventing child abuse and neglecting and strengthening the communities in which we live. Do we have anyone, Ms. Vincent, I know you're here, obviously, and maybe some other folks as well, but if there's anyone else in the community who would like to address council or speak to this matter, we'd love to hear from you as well. But why don't we start with you, Ms. Vincent? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm here with members of the Human Services Advisory Council, but before I turn it over, I did want to just mention some of the things and some of the activities that have happened here in the City of Falls Church last year around child abuse prevention. And first of all, several community members attended a We Support the Girls community event on February 11th. I know several of you were there to bring awareness to child sexual abuse. On April 25th, the city hosted a workshop sponsored by Darkness to Light for adults on ways to prevent, recognize, and react responsibly to child sexual abuse. The Housing and Human Services and the Police Department met with Fairfax County Child Advocacy Center to develop a memorandum of understanding so that child advocacy efforts could be coordinated seamlessly with the Arlington court system. And Housing and Human Services posted a blog on preventing child sexual abuse. An earlier blog was on preventing child abuse and neglect generally. Housing and Human Services updated its webpage to include a comprehensive resource guide and links to resources. The city updated its administrative regulations governing the hiring and vetting of staff and volunteers who work with vulnerable populations, including children. And the city maintains a contract with Fairfax County for Child Protective Services, and they maintain a hotline, Ms. Hardy mentioned the number, that residents may call if they are concerned about a child's well-being or want to report or discuss a possible case of abuse or neglect, or simply want advice or counseling or resources or help in any way. And then finally, the city works with Fairfax County on the Community Policy and Management Team to implement Child Services Act, designed to help youth with emotional and behavioral needs and their families who may be particularly vulnerable. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to members here of the Human Services Advisory Council.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you for your good work.
Good evening. My name is Elisa Macht, and I am here today with Deborah Roth. As Nancy said, we're members of the Human Services Advisory Council. We would like to thank everyone who participated in the planting and dedication of the Pinwheel Garden, including our City Council members, and in particular, Ms. Hardy and Mayor Tarter, for your inspiring words. The pinwheel represents what we want for every child. It is a reflection of hope, health, and safety. April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month and Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. The Pinwheel Garden will remain throughout the month to remind us that we must provide a safe and caring environment for all of our children to thrive. Research has identified factors known to prevent and reduce child abuse and neglect. These factors, as were said in the proclamation, include parental resilience, nurturing and attachment, social connections, knowledge about parenting and child development, social and emotional competence of children, and concrete supports for parents. As a community, we can get involved in building these factors and supporting families and children. Bookmarks were distributed at the Pinwheel planting this evening and are available in the back if anybody would like to take one. They list the things that we can do to support families, such as let parents know it's okay to ask for help, offer to help an overwhelmed parent, and know how to recognize and report child abuse. Strong, nurturing communities like ours that are positive, supportive of families can play a role in preventing child abuse and neglect and promoting child and family well-being. Thank you all for your support.
Thank you so much. Did you want to speak, Ms. Roth, or? No. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to address council? You're certainly welcome to if you'd like to speak to this matter. If not, do you want to come forward and we'll give you the proclamation, maybe take a photo?
Wonderful. Perfect. Good job, guys. All right.
Okay, so our next proclamation, I think, is related, but certainly somewhat different and equally as important. And for that, I think the Vice Mayor will do the honors. Ms. Conley?
This is a proclamation declaring April 2018 as Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. Whereas Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month calls attention to the fact that sexual violence is a serious problem affecting women, children, and men of all racial, cultural, educational, and economic backgrounds, and finding solutions requires input and action from everyone in the community. And whereas to increase awareness about this issue and future assaults, the month of April has been designated as National Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. And whereas child sexual abuse prevention has been established as a community priority. And whereas sexual abuse induces psychological, emotional, and physical effects that can have lifelong consequences for survivors of abuse. And whereas we must work together to raise the profile of and educate our community about sexual violence prevention, about supporting survivors, and about the importance of speaking out about abuse. And whereas effective child sexual abuse prevention programs begin with awareness, education, and community involvement. and these programs succeed because of meaningful community partnerships. And whereas the City of Falls Church Police Department seeks to eliminate the prevalence of sexual violence by educating women through a free self-defense class, RAD, that has educated more than 900 women in risk reduction and self-defense. And whereas preventing sexual violence creates a safer environment for everyone.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2018 as Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month in the City of Falls Church, Virginia, and urge all citizens to recognize this month by dedicating themselves to preventing sexual assault and supporting survivors. Okay, Chief, would you like to come forward and either say a few words or come forward and get the proclamation?
Once again, I'd like to thank council for taking a voice for those that may be marginalized in the community, and particularly women that have been victimized by sexual assault. It is a top priority of the law enforcement community to take on sexual assault because it is one of the top crimes against persons, Part 1 offenses. We in the city have been very fortunate with a very strong group of little ladies that have put us on the map with We Support the Girls. And again, I'd like to recognize their efforts each and every year in the efforts today of the Pinwheel Garden. But I embrace this proclamation and honored to accept on behalf of the city.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak? If you're certainly welcome to, but if not, why don't you come forward, Chief, and we'll give you the proclamation, maybe do a quick photo. Of course. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Ms. Vincent. I just wanted to add that I think safety of our children is definitely one of the biggest responsibilities we have as parents, adults, and certainly city council members. And I think in the era of Me Too, clearly I think the need to remain vigilant and aware that this sort of thing happens no matter where you are, whether you're in Falls Church, which is one of the safest and healthiest communities in the world, certainly in the United States. I think no community is safe from these types of things happening. So I think it's incumbent on us as the adults to do something about it and to listen to the children and to listen to the women. So thank you.
All right, thank you much. And we have one more proclamation, which is a proclamation declaring April 1st through the 7th as Local Government Education Week. So, Mr. Z, would you like to do the honors?
Sure. Whereas, since the colonial period, the Commonwealth of Virginia has closely held the institutions of local government, and whereas local governments throughout the Commonwealth provide valuable services to the citizens of the communities they serve, and whereas citizen services such as law enforcement, public health and safety, recreational opportunities, and educating local children are most often delivered at the local level, and whereas in recognition of the work performed by local governments on February 29th, 2012, the Virginia General Assembly designated the first week in April as Local Government Education Week in Virginia. And whereas April 2nd, 1908 was creation of the council manager form of government in the city of Staunton, thereby making the first week in April appropriate for this designation. And whereas city government staff and elected officials often share their expertise in classrooms and with community organizations, volunteer at school and community events, mentor students, and provide them with opportunities to volunteer in the city. And whereas city continues to actively engage youth in civic engagement learning opportunities such as Operation Earthwatch, community cleanup events, youth representatives on boards and commissions, and scout participation in council meetings. And whereas the city website and social media postings provide daily information about the services performed by the City of Falls Church.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the week of April 1st through the 7th, 2018, as Local Government Education Week in the City of Falls Church, and recognize the collaboration between the Falls Church city government and the Falls Church city schools to educate citizens about their local government and engage the next generation of local government managers. I know we've got a few local government officials in the room right now, but before we get to them, I just wanted to say that I think in a lot of ways, local government employees and officials are the unsung heroes. They are on call, particularly the government folks, not the city council folks, but the government folks are on call 24 hours a day. I get emails from Wyatt and others throughout the week in snowstorms, in the middle of the night if something happens at 3 in the morning about school closings and the like. And I do call him and send him emails at all hours too, and he's there, and as is the whole staff. So that's what keeps the trains running on time here in our community. It keeps our streets clean, and people correspond with us and ask us about issues, and they get passed on to local government employees. And I think that's what makes this such a great city and such a special place is the local employees. So our hats off to you all, and thank you as a representative of the entire city staff, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. And one thing that is special about this proclamation is it really is part of our outreach to future generations of local government managers. And we're trying to reach people in high school and college to let them know about local government, and it's a great place to work because we really need that talent. So thank you for this proclamation.
Would you like to come forward, and would all city employees like to come forward and receive it on behalf of the rest of our city staff? Dr. Noonan, you're welcome to come up as well. Would you like to come up and join us?
That's quite all right. I like to be behind the camera. Wyatt, take the proclamation. All right. My local government people, just switch. There we go. All right. Yes. All right. Great job. Way to go, team.
Okay, just a couple other preliminary matters. Today is Mr. Z's birthday. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Mr. Z said he only had one wish, and that was to be sung "Happy Birthday" by the whole city council. You ready, Phil? All right, you're leading it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dan. Happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you all so much. And, you can only be 39 so many times, so I'm working on that. Thank you.
Also, some of you may be aware, Falls Church was just named Healthiest Community in America by U.S. News and World Report. So exciting news, and certainly a community, an event that I think the whole community should share in. I think it's really exciting. It's throughout the whole United States, and U.S. News and World Report is certainly a major publication. Vice Mayor Connolly, I understand, was interviewed today by Channel 4 News about it. So the word is spreading far and wide, but I think it does validate the work we've been trying to do over the past couple of years. And it's not just how many times you go to the doctor. The matrix is much broader than that, and it involved quality of life and a lot of the issues, walkability, bikeability, creating a vibrant downtown that we've been working on, planning for the future, that we as a council and I think as a community as a whole have been working on these past years. So I'm quite proud of our community and our staff for this nice honor. So I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to say, but certainly you're welcome to, if you would.
I was just
Ms.
going to add that I think it's clearly tied to the fact that the council has competed as a team in the annual Run for the Schools. This will be our third year coming up.
That's good. Mr. Duncan?
I just wanted to call out the quote in the story. The quotes by the mayor and the vice mayor both were very excellent. There was also a very fine quote from Ms. Vincent about the concern that we have as in our community for those who are less fortunate and need some help. I thought that was a very important thing to add into an article about the healthiness of our community. So thanks to staff for being on the ball again.
Okay, anything else? We do have Cheetos in the dais. I didn't mention that in the article, but there are Cheetos for those who want it up there. Okay, so, and one last sort of item. Some of you may know as well, I recently returned from Lebanon. I just got back a couple hours ago. And I was on a trip that was sponsored by the Northern Virginia Relief Center, which collected blankets and coats throughout Northern Virginia, including Falls Church, over the past few years for distribution to Syrian refugees, both in Turkey and in Lebanon. Several years ago, I went to Turkey on one of the trips, and I was able to go on this short trip and just returned, as I mentioned, just a few hours ago with some other current elected officials and former elected officials, and that include time at a Syrian refugee camp near the border of Syria in Lebanon, at a school and other relief centers. And I would just say the refugees there are really in dire circumstances, and I think greatly appreciated the materials that are brought to them. But it's really overwhelming. Their need is overwhelming. I think in Lebanon right now, there are 4 million Lebanese citizens. The population of Lebanon is 4 million, but there's also 1.5 million Syrian refugees there right now. So it really is, just for that country, overwhelming. But it was a quite moving experience, and I was lucky to have the opportunity to go. So I'll report maybe a little bit more about that, but I wanted to make mention of it. I also mentioned that no taxpayer money was used during my trip, but it was a great, wonderful trip. So again, I can give a little more detail later on. Is there anything else before we get on to other business that anyone would like to say? How about oaths of office? Are there any oaths of office, Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. I have Chris McLeod for the Environmental Sustainability Council.
Welcome. Come on forward. Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. And so you just raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Chris McLeod,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform
discharge and perform
all the duties incumbent upon me
all the duties incumbent upon me
as a member of the Environmental Sustainability Council,
as a member of the Environmental Sustainability Council,
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to the best of my abilities, so help me God.
Yeah. And I just need your signature.
Congratulations. Yeah, great. Whoop. You just get one. There you go. Why don't you turn around, we'll get a picture, maybe you can take the congratulations of the rest of council.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. Okay. More left. A little more. Oh, awesome. Good job. All right. 2, 3.
Yeah, the ESC is so strong now with so much you all are involved in and making such a great impact in the community. You're involved with a wonderful board, or is it a commission? What is it? Is it board? Okay, all right, well, let's hear. We'll hear. All right, well, let's go on. And why don't, Madam Clerk, you summarize the written comments for us, if you'd be so kind?
Sure, thank you. Deborah Z. Roth forwarded comments about adding affordable housing funding to the budget. Rosalie Cosbelt of 531 Great Falls Street wrote to support fully funding the school budget and delaying the library project. Katie Nemi of 304A Pine Street wrote to support fully funding the school budget. The FCPS Health and Wellness Advisory Committee wrote in support of funding a school psychologist position. So Sajila Ramsey of 1000 Parker Street wrote about vehicle storage on Ellison Street. Thomas Riley wrote with concerns about activity at the Friends of Falls Church Shelter. Sandra Bolivar of 100 West Annandale Road wrote about safety issues with streetlight outages at Broad and Annandale. And Gail Wadsworth of 200 North Maple Avenue requested trash collection at Park Towers condominiums.
All right, thank you much. Our next item of business is the ESC annual report. I know you all have been very busy, so look forward to hearing the specifics.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm Corey Weiss. I'm the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Council, and thank you for inviting us here tonight for the annual report. We do have a very active and wonderful group of people volunteering with us this year. We've got 9 members of the ESC, 12 non-ESC members who participate in our 3 subcommittees, and we've had 6 student representatives as part of the ESC this year, so we're very pleased to have such broad engagement from the community. Thomas Cash is our vice chair. We have 3 subcommittees, as I mentioned. The Energy Transition Subcommittee is led by Tim Stevens. Sarah Belden leads our Education Task Group, and Melissa Teets leads the Habitat Restoration Group. In 2017, the ESC worked towards supporting the goals we adopted last year with a very laser-like focus on sustainable development. Some of the highlights from 2017, one of the major thrusts of our work has been focusing on the new development in the city, particularly George Mason High School, focusing on the RFP. We hosted a panel discussion on green schools in October to encourage the inclusion of environmental goals in the RFP. And I'm very pleased to say that thanks to the thoughtful and active engagement of Dr. Noonan and school board members, we're very pleased that the RFP includes such targets as LEED Gold and Net Zero Ready. So we're very thankful to see that. The Energy Transition Subcommittee, of course, was quite instrumental in laying the groundwork for some of that work by marshaling the resources for a feasibility study on geothermal, which was extremely helpful for including that in the RFP. One of the highlights of our work on the schools RFP as well was developing a deeper relationship with the Tree Commission. We had a joint meeting with them this year, wrote a number of letters together, and we've developed a very productive and fruitful relationship. In sustainable development more broadly, the ESC engaged with developers, including Bob Young on the Railroad Avenue cottages. And we developed later in the year, we met with the Broad and Washington development team to talk about with Insight to talk about the Broad and Washington project and encourage them to achieve LEED Gold or higher, which is what many other boards and commissions have encouraged. And that brings me to the last point on sustainable development that I wanted to raise. One of the focuses of the ESC this year has been exploring the possibility of a green building policy. There's a policy for city buildings that we will try to achieve LEED Silver or better, but that's really the only segment of our building stock for which the city has a green building policy. And we're concerned that developers like Insight Properties may see us as a weak link in the region because of the absence of a LEED Gold, of a green building policy. The ETS was very instrumental in helping the city achieve a greenhouse gas reduction goal this year, and I think Tim will talk a little bit more about that. Buildings represent 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, so I think it is important for the city to develop a green building policy, and we look forward to working more on that over the year with other boards and commissions. Why don't I turn it over to Tim Stevens to say a few words now. I forgot to mention one of our most important team members, which is Kate Walker, the city's environmental programs coordinator.
Yeah, our subcommittee's report is in your agenda, so I won't go through that. But I just want to leave you with one thought. And that is you have a lot of issues to deal with, and certainly tonight is an example of that. And the need to address climate change is always challenging, given that the brunt of the hardships of climate change is going to be on future generations, not the here and now. But I would just point out one thing, and that is that leading cities and communities around the country and here in the Northern Virginia region are increasingly ramping up their efforts to address greenhouse gas emissions. And we're seeing now in Virginia, large corporations like Microsoft and Facebook are coming here, but they're making it a condition of their coming here, access to green energy. So you're seeing very large solar farms finally coming to Virginia, 500 megawatts and larger. And they're not doing this for moral reasons, which might appeal to people like myself, but they're doing it because their customers are demanding this of them. And increasingly, residents are going to be asking local governments to do more about addressing greenhouse gas emissions. So I would just ask, even though you do have a lot on your plate, that in the routine course of business that you make, addressing climate change just part of your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you have more?
No, that's it. I don't know.
Okay, well, listen, you guys have been very productive, and you did a great job, I think, on the RFP at the schools, and have really just been very involved, I think, to the betterment of our community. So I want to thank you both for your leadership and the whole committee, and also Mr. Z, as a matter of fact, as well, for his leadership, not just on council, but regionally and statewide on Virginia Municipal League and also a Council of Governments.
Can I make a comment? Danny, make a comment?
Why don't we start with Mr. Z and
Sure.
work our way around the table? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. We're really fortunate to have people in the city that have this as a passion, and it makes that space much more productive, and you can actually see all the momentum developing. People like Corey who've who's not shy about asking questions weekends, night, morning, sometimes 5 or 6 times a day, and I think that's part of her skill set where if there's something to be done, that she'll just keep pulling at it until it reaches a useful conclusion. And speaking of useful conclusions, we've now had a panel on the schools, a panel on development, and an invitation to tour some of the sites that were illustrated at the last panel. I'm just wondering, were there any short-term things you're working on that additional panels or tours that you can speak about?
Absolutely. So Michael Stevens, I focused my annual report on 2017, so I didn't mention the Sustainability and Resilience panel that we held last month, at which Michael Stevens, the president of the Capitol Riverfront Business Improvement District, invited us or suggested that City of Falls Church decision makers take a best practice tour of sustainable developments in the community. He followed up offering to host a tour, said, give me your dates, come on out, and I'd be happy to host you. And as many of you may know, there are a number of really sterling examples of sustainable development in that area. Chris Brown from Federal Realty, which developed the Pike and Rose project, they were also at the panel, and they followed up and said, please come visit. So we'd like to work on organizing some tours before May 1st of some of the developments in this area. So I'd be happy to reach out and coordinate, maybe for members of City Council, appropriate members of City staff. We're also circling in on having another discussion, another panel discussion in May, diving a little bit deeper on 2 particular topics related to sustainable development. At the West Falls Church project, we're circling in on green infrastructure and green spaces, open spaces for capturing stormwater, as well as green spaces in that space in general, and looking at sustainable energy solutions for that space as well. And I know members of CACT are also considering sustainable transportation, so we look forward to participating in those discussions as well.
Well, thank you for those quite ambitious topics, and so perhaps next year we can add to most healthy, most educated, richest. We can also add the greenest. So we have that goal to look forward to. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy, and then Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss and Mr. Stevens, for all your leadership. It's nice to see the ESC so active and productive. One question I have, since we've been talking so much about Arlington, I know that Arlington recently was awarded the newly created LEED certification for communities. Has the ESC given thought on what that means, what that takes? Is that something that we would like to aspire to? And if so, what sort of investment is needed in the community to get there?
That's a great question, Ms. Hardy. When Jay Wilson from the Washington, D.C. District Department of Energy and Environment came to our panel last month, he talked about Washington, D.C. receiving a similar, I believe they were LEED Platinum certification. I don't know the details of what goes into a community-wide certification, but I have a feeling that involves having strong policies and implementing those policies. So the district has the Sustainable DC Plan, the Climate Ready DC Plan. They have a number of other policies in place to ensure sustainable development. Arlington, likewise, has a Green Building Bonus Density Incentive Program, and the vast majority of their special exceptions projects in the past since 2014 have been LEED Silver or better, including multifamily residential, commercial, office, any segment you can think of. So I think investing in policies is probably a first step, but I'd be happy to investigate and understand more about what goes into the community.
I think it was great to know, because I think I really like Mr. Stevens' point that it's hard to invest in something that's so far in the future, but it's important to kind of lead by example, right? So if we expect that of our developers and the buildings around us, it's important as a community to think about what that investment entails, especially as we're in budget season, to think about what sort of money investments that might be needed to really be serious about this. Because I think as a community valley, we certainly embrace it, but I think having that someone certify us to actually say that, yes, here are all the things you're doing, I think is important too. And then likewise, I think as we think about 2018, I'd be curious, what are your kind of top 3 to 5 priorities? Like, what should we hold you accountable to? What are you holding yourselves accountable to, so we can look forward to more great work coming out of the ESC?
Sure. The goals that we set forth for the City Council work plan, I think are still in play. Those are really focusing on the West Falls Church project, hoping for results similar to what we've seen so far with the George Mason High School. We'd like to see, we're very happy that the conceptual RFP included environmental targets. We'd like to see the design RFP include tighter environmental targets, and we'd like to see an environmentally skilled developer selected for that. So that's one major thrust of our work. We'd like to continue exploring a green building policy, collaborating with other boards and commissions as well. And we'd like to support the city's really excellent work, which hasn't gotten mentioned yet, on composting and reducing solid waste reduction. So we've also recently learned that Kate Walker will be working on updating Chapter 5, the Natural Resources chapter of the Comprehensive Plan. So we look forward to supporting that as well.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Oh, my goodness. Do you want to say something about PACE, Tim?
4 letters. PACE. Property Assessed Clean Energy.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys, Corey, Tim, Kate, Councilman Z, and others. I think you guys have a very, very important committee here in the city. And I think the accolades that were just awarded to the city, amongst others, U.S. News and World Report, being a healthiest community is, I think, very much centered around our values related to sustainability, and I think that a lot of that credit goes to your efforts here. And I think that it's important, you mentioned the green building policy. I, for one, someone that works in real estate and also has a position here on council, look forward to working with you all to codify some of that for the city. Because as Mr. Stevens noted, you know, the work today is an investment in the future, and I can tell you from working in real estate, the idea of sustainable development and certifications around USGBC and Energy Star are no more nice to haves. It is the standard. And to a large degree, Mr. Stevens, as you point out, there are a lot of businesses that realize that it isn't just a moral obligation, it is an investment in the future. And we talk a lot about resiliency. And when you talk about preserving both local business, multinational, the economics of running a community altogether, a lot of that hinges on our ability to face some of those issues in the future. And so I think that what you guys are doing is incredibly important. And again, I look at accolades like the U.S. News and World Report, Healthiest Community, that is driven by sustainability is a big part of what you guys are doing, a big part of what's driving that. And again, thank you all for your efforts. Very much appreciate that and look forward to working with you all on your initiatives in 2018.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Duncan?
If I could thank you all for your participation in the Youth Representatives Initiative. You know, when we started that program a few years back, we really weren't sure the degree to which students would be interested and the boards and commissions would be willing to bring them on. And I think there's no doubt that you all are, you know, the league leader in participation, involvement, and as that program goes forward and hopefully deepens and broadens, we'd like to tap your expertise on what you've learned about, you know, the best way to engage the next generation in our community, because you certainly have been at the forefront of the YRI.
Well, we look forward to having more students involved, and we look forward to working with them to find meaningful projects or meaningful engagement with them. We've suggested that this year students might want to consider self-led projects that the ESC members might be able to mentor, or at least give students the space to kind of talk about and work with their projects with us when they join our monthly meetings. So, okay.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
Before you sit down, Ms. Weiss, one more thing. Is this the 25th year of Operation Earthwatch?
Oh,
Which comes from
yes,
you?
it is. Thank you,
So-
Ms. Connolly, for reminding me of that. I was so excited to hear from Tim that I failed to mention the great accomplishments of both the Operation Earthwatch team and the Habitat Restoration Group. So yes, this year is Operation Earthwatch is the city's flagship program for environmental education in the elementary schools, not just Mount Daniel and Thomas Jefferson, but St. James Catholic School as well, and any children who are homeschooled. And this year is the 25th anniversary of it. I think last year we had over 100 students participate, and we'll be having an anniversary party this year in May to celebrate it. And I should also mention that the Habitat Restoration Group conducted 11 cleanups and invasive weed pullings last year, and they're looking forward to doing more of the same this year.
Yes, and I think a lot of the kids who start with the Operation Earthwatch end up being the ones that are pulling the weeds with the environmental
Yeah.
group and then serving on your committee as well. And I know those of us that have had children in the schools have all done our time as the parents of Operation Earthwatch children. And I know that I learned a lot as a parent on all those little projects. So thank you for continuing that for 25 years. I think that really is a testament to the volunteers who make that happen.
All right, I think that's it, but thank you.
I'm sorry for running away too early.
Thank you. You've done a great job. You really have done, you've just been really good as a leader of this group. So I think we've all observed that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to receipt of public comment. So I'd already have some speaker slips. Anyone in the audience is welcome to speak. We would just ask you to fill out a speaker slip like this. And when you come up, please keep your comments at 3 minutes so everyone has a chance to speak. And also state your name and address for the record. If you'd like to speak, you can speak now. Or if there's a matter you wish to speak on, you can delay your comments until the matter is called. It's up to you. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start calling names. And come on down. Deborah Roth. Ms. Roth, followed by Mr. Gittens. Welcome.
Thank you. This is moving. I'm Deborah Z. Roth. My address is 503 North Roosevelt Boulevard, Oakwood Apartments, apartment A421 here in the city. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and councilors, as usual, we face budget issues, a lot we need and want to do. A lot's critical and much seems very important for us to get done versus escalated, hard for many to afford taxes. At the town meeting a couple of weeks ago, many of us discussed options for how to accomplish much of what we want without raising taxes. I believe, as do many, that the new slated and likely developments coming into the city will raise our revenue. It's already doing so. And then there's an item that didn't make it into this year's budget. Coming around 2026, the Fields Affordable Housing Unit commitment will expire, as many of you know. We need an estimated $2 million fueled into it. Whereas the newly formed Housing Policy Revision Group will be exploring cash alternatives, longer commitments, and other options to secure affordable housing in the city of Falls Church, we need to prepare now with a budget that's in front of us today. After all, many times, including at the council and boards and commissions retreat, which as a member of the Human Services Advisory Council I participated in, the decision was clear. Affordable housing is a mission of Falls Church City, and one we want to make more of a reality. It's essential for our near future and the growth plan. It can even mean more stability for our economy. And I want to emphasize to the city's leaders and residents that affordable housing is not just about making it possible for workers, seniors, young people, or whomever the demographic is to live here or continue to live here. Many who require what's deemed affordable are able to spend elsewhere in the city. There's different kinds of affordable housing, and many of those people are not pouring cash into mortgages and home expenses. You'll see them in restaurants and so on and so forth. The affordable demographic helps diversify our economy. They're people. The Healthy Falls Church City article in U.S. News and World Report noted that as well. So I asked that we look at putting about $100,000 in the budget annually, which with interest will get us closer to what we need to keep the fields affordable units. I can't take credit for that idea, but a number of very interested people have been excited about it since it was introduced. It's a strong step as we architect what else will get us in the direction in which we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Gittens. Welcome.
Mayor Tartar, Vice Mayor Connolly, members of the council. My name is Tom Gittens at 153 West Annandale Road, right behind the Harris Teeter. I am for the Broad and Washington Street development. In addition, I beg you not to allow your results fall victim to the dollar for a grocery store, but instead enrich our community with regional attractions, destinations that will embody your legacy as forethinkers. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you as well. We appreciate it and appreciate First Fridays. What's that?
Next Friday.
Next Friday. All right. We're looking forward to it. Our next speaker is Mr. Adrobo. Followed by Ms. Kruger.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. I want to be more formal this time because I think what I'm going to request has to call the attention of everyone, and I hope that you can hear me pretty well. So dear members of the City Council, my name is Julio Hidrobo. I have been a resident of the City of Church for the last 13 years, and I have been the chair of the Housing Commission for the last 5 years and until this last meeting. My fight, as you know me through the years, is the fight for having a decent place to live for everyone, to have a decent place close to where you work, and to have a decent place affordable enough so everyone could possibly live a normal life without struggling with budgets. I'm talking about budgets. I'm here because we are struggling with the budget of our city. I realize affordable housing hasn't been funded, and I know that we need to do something about it. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, what we have done in the past in terms of affordability is not working. No funding is not working. So that's the reason why I'm here today. And that's the reason why I'm present here today. Because I will fight until the last day of my service to the city to the city, and I will fight for this affordable housing. And that day is today. I have to start by saying this, that the money that we get today will not solve the problem of affordability, but it will make an impact to the future of affordable housing here in the city. The following points are important because we need that money for the following things. First, we need to preserve and protect what we already have as affordable housing. We have to protect the fields, the Winter Hill, the Roosevelt Towers, the Merrill House, the Lee Square, the Columbia West, and the Broad Falls. The fields, and somebody already mentioned Deborah, we need to get more than $1 million to keep that place affordable. We need to start saving right now, because if we don't do that, we will lose affordability of 96 units in the next couple of years. Second, all housing projects will need the power of providing leverage to different resources and funds, we already only have 299. I will ask for one more minute. We already have only $299,000 in our affordable housing fund. And we can buy even half a lot, average lot here in the city, because just the average lot in the city is more than $600,000. We cannot buy even half of that lot. Third, since 2013, we haven't been able to help people in need of rental assistance. We need to continue not depending on other people outside of our limits to provide assistance to our own residents. 4, we need to provide attractive ways to help first-time home buyers and seniors who may need funds and grants to get affordable housing here in the city. And finally, we will need to rise to the occasion when we start negotiating with other neighboring jurisdictions to provide affordable housing. We can sit down at the table without offering our portion to help and resolve what it is considered a regional and a national problem. Not funding affordable housing is one of the biggest mistakes that will play against our vision of a future and diverse and inclusive society. Never forget this, that affordable housing is not housing the poor. It is providing a decent place to live here in the city for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for your service on the commission. Our next speaker is Ms. Kruger. Thank you. Followed by Mr. Adams.
We're going to switch up, if that's okay with you guys. Same issue. Mayor, council members, and neighbors, I'm Matt Adams. I live at 200 North Maple Avenue, a couple blocks away. The residents of Park Towers pay twice for waste collection, and I'm here to ask the council to correct this problem. City-provided trash collection expenses ultimately come from real estate tax revenue. The tax rate is the same for both single-family and multifamily. But the city provides waste collection only for single-family residents, not condo residents. The result is that condo residents have been and continue to foot part of the bill for a service the city provides to single-family homes. Because we obviously need this service and the city doesn't provide it, Park Towers residents must also pay for our own collection. The city service is currently $290 a year per house. Park Towers residents pay an additional $356 a year. I ask you, what is the justification for this double payment? I understand that governments pool revenue to provide the services that citizens need, and that revenue raised from each individual and the services each individual receives never perfectly match. For example, someone could argue, why do I have to pay for a library if I don't use it? Another might ask, why do I have to pay for schools if I don't have kids? Or why do I have to pay for insurance if I'm young and healthy? There are justifications for those payments, but trash collection does not fall under one of those categories. Park Towers residents need trash collection and pay taxes at the same rate as those who receive it, but we don't receive it and must instead pay for it separately. This is like telling a resident who wants to use the library to fund it and then saying they can't use it. Instead, they must pay a monthly book fee for a separate service. Recognizing this blatant unfairness, neighboring jurisdictions like Alexandria and DC tax multifamily residents differently for trash collection. Returning to Falls Church, as far back as at least 2004, in the 20-year waste management plan, the city recognized that the current policy is unjust. I quote the 2004 plan, "Provide a more equitable system for city management of costs associated with waste collection so that taxpayers who do not receive city refuse collection, like residents of condominiums, would not be required to subsidize those residents who receive these services." I repeat, residents of condominiums would not be required to subsidize those residents who receive these services. Yet 14 years later, nothing has changed. My family has lived in Park Towers a short time compared to many, but in 7 years, we've already paid roughly $2,000 for someone else's trash collection. Don't let more time pass. I ask you to do the right thing now. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor Tarta and members of the City Council. My name is Claudia Kruger, and I'm a resident and the Vice President of Park Towers Condominium. The address is 200 North Maple Avenue. And I'm here today to speak on behalf of the association and the residents. As Matt mentioned, Park Towers is here tonight to ask the city to right a long-standing wrong. The city collects taxes levied at the same rate from all residential owners. The city pays for solid waste collection from real estate tax revenue, but only single-family and townhomes owners receive city trash collection service. Condo owners do not receive that service and must pay for it separately. So condo owners, specifically Park Tower residents, pay taxes for a service they do not receive. We are unjustly subsidizing the trash collection fee for other residents. We asked the City Council to remedy this problem. To do so, the city could collect our trash or pay a contractor to collect our trash or give Park Towers condo owners a property tax credit in the amount of the trash collection fee paid for collection from single family residences. We only ask for fair treatment to be charged and only to be charged for services we receive, not charged for services denied us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. During your city manager report, maybe Mr. Shields, you could discuss this issue or address this issue. Our next speaker is Gina Kachechi, followed by Mr. McLeod.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Gina Kachechi. I live at 204 North Van Buren Street. I have been a resident of the City of Falls Church for 25 years, first at Oakwood Apartments for 3.5 years. I've been in my house, oh my goodness, a long time. I am here to ask you to approve final reading in 2 weeks for the Broad and Washington project. I'm also here to share with you the top 10 reasons to approve the proposed Broad and Washington mixed-use project. Number 1, not necessarily in this particular order. Enlarge a lively arts and entertainment district with additional high-quality restaurants attractive to young professionals and not so young professionals. 2, add up to $1 million in annual net tax revenues that can be used for the city and the schools. Number 3, provide a larger, customized space for Creative Cauldron, an award-winning live theater and arts education nonprofit organization. I have an interest there. Number 4, 66,700 square feet of Class A office space, more than is currently on the site, and 26,000 square feet of retail restaurant space. It will bring in new residents and workers who will support the existing local businesses and restaurants. There will be 2 new, not there now, public outdoor spaces, which will be open to everyone. More green space, healthier city. Sustainable development. The project's goal is to achieve LEED Gold status. Insight Development has committed at a minimum to achieve LEED Silver status. The Falls Church City Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve this project. Keep Creative Cauldron in Falls Church City in a permanent home. Our lease expires next June 2019. And there is no other place for Creative Cauldron in the City of Falls Church, and we cannot stay in our current location. Create a welcoming gathering place that will energize the downtown, complement the existing businesses, and promote the walkability of the city. Things that you, Mayor Tarter, just mentioned in your remarks about our being named one of the healthiest cities. Lots of reasons to support this project. I am also here to present to Council a petition signed by 94 residents of the city and business owners in the city. I would like to call out John Taylor, the manager of Brown's Hardware, signed this petition, as did Nash of Nash Hair Design, so 2 neighbors to the project. So I'm here to present this petition and the 93 signatures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Mr. McLeod. Welcome back up. Long time no see.
So, yes, I'm Chris McLeod of 824 Village Road. I live right around the corner from Gina. I just wanted to address the council about a couple conditions on North Roosevelt Street. We've been in touch with a lieutenant from Chief Gavin's department regarding vehicular speeds on the street, and he's been very helpful in that respect. But I also wanted to note that the side of the street on city property, if you're going, I guess, toward Oakwood, so traveling from Broad Street over to Roosevelt Street and Roosevelt Boulevard, it has become very overgrown. And the only speed limit sign between Ridge Place and Tuckahoe Street, perhaps on the street as a whole, is completely overgrown. There's trash that accumulates on that stretch between those streets regularly, bordering residents' property and on the city property. So if there's something that the city council or city government could do to help address this problem, because it's really painful to go out and pick up trash in your yard that's ended up there. And I think regarding the speed, uncovering the speed limit sign and clearing out really all of the underbrush and debris that's accumulated may help in that respect as well, and maybe putting up some no littering signs or something. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Mr. Shields, let me just ask you, do we have an Adopt a Street program in Falls Church where people can, the Boy Scouts could adopt a section of a road for trash cleanup and the like?
Trash pickup. We have a citywide trash pickup day. We don't
understand.
actually, I don't think have a program where people can adopt streets. Maybe we do. I'll need to check on that. But what I'm familiar with is sort of the general citywide
Sure.
effort.
But that's basically once or twice a year.
That's correct.
I mean, it's kind of hard to have a can wait 6 months to get picked up.
That's true.
Okay. All right, well, let's tell you what. Let's move on now to council requests. Are there any council requests? Ms. Hardy, then Vice Mayor Connolly, and then who
I know,
else?
it was almost a month ago now that we talked about the exotic animal ordinance, and so I wanted to check in on that, Ms. McCoskey, before we lose sight of it. I know it's something that seemed like pretty straightforward, given that we had Arlington potentially to follow the lead on.
That ball is actually in my court. I'd like to work with the animal control officer. When this first came up 2 years ago, the animal control officer did look at it, and she is a seasoned professional, and her recommendation was to keep the code as is. So I'd like to sit down and speak, sort of understand the issues, and come back with a recommendation to the city council. And so it's on my list of things to do, and I think what often helps is to set a date for when this will come back, and that will help organize our minds. So we will try to do that within a month.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
I tried to fix it. Mr. Shields, just looking at some of the questions from community members, I want to make sure that they're being addressed, because they're addressed to City Council, but a lot of them are staff concerns. So Sajila Ramsey read about vehicle storage on Ellison Street. Whose department would that fall under to?
That is a zoning issue, and we currently have not identified a violation associated with that complaint, but we are still looking into it.
Has someone responded to her?
There was an
someone
initial
respond to her?
response, but I think she has written on multiple occasions, and so I'll check and see if her latest correspondence has had a response.
Okay.
Before we move on, so does she know your response, that you believe there's no violations?
Let me check, and we had conversation just last week on what the state of the situation is, and so I will need to follow up about a response directly to the complainant.
Do they have license plates, those vehicles?
My understanding is that they are titled and licensed in the city of Falls Church.
With license plates on them?
And
Okay.
decaled and registered, et cetera.
And is there a vehicle ownership limit?
That was the question that we were looking into, and we have not identified where that limit exists in the code. My memory is that there was, but we have not identified what that is. And so that's what we're looking into.
Okay. Thank you. And then Ms. Boulevard wrote about streetlight outages at Broad and Annandale. I know that's is that in our budget? Or to fix the Broad and Annandale light, she had trouble there?
Yes, that is the signal that is in the budget to have that rewired, and that's going to be an expensive fix, but that is in the funding for that is in the budget.
So did somebody respond to her?
I did follow up with her via email. She also had some concerns about street lights. Some are city and some are Dominion, and we're working on those as well.
Okay, but she has gotten a response. And then my last one is just about the Park Towers condominiums question about trash, if you could address that. I think most of them have left, but it would be good to know, since 14 years ago that was a goal, what was the decision, or could we have a study on that or a report on that?
Yeah, the mayor had asked that I address that in the manager's report, but I will make just a few comments on it. It is in the 2004 solid waste plan. It is part of the adopted policy. It's something we should look into. The last time it was seriously looked into is in 2011, when the city moved to outsource trash pickup and moved to the bins. At the time, there was not, I think, a political support for changing the fee structure, i.e., really what was discussed at that time was a pay-as-you-throw structure, and that's what's in the solid waste plan as well. Some of the arguments against it, pay-as-you-throw, are the administrative expense, and when it's built into the tax code, there is essentially no administrative cost for the collection of the money that's needed to provide that service. There is the equity issue, given the fact that everybody pays the tax, but not everybody receives the service. But that is not something that has risen up as a policy concern significant enough to address it in the last 15 years. So that's the state of it. I think what we'll need to do is provide the council with more information on this. It is a major policy issue. It affects virtually everybody, and so it might be something that is worth putting on the council work plan and thinking about it first. Is this a question that you want to have on the agenda? Because it's a substantial one. It'll require a great deal of analysis, and I think you'll get a lot of comment.
So my question actually, sorry, go ahead.
Does it also apply to commercial buildings? Commercial buildings provide their own trash, solid waste as well, correct?
Yeah, my question was really, is it really just an inequity with condos or apartments and other commercial buildings? Because I think since 2004, and certainly since even 2011, the makeup of the city's changing.
True.
And so I think the numbers, what we might have looked at back then, probably pretty different now.
With a few exceptions, the general rule is if you had a site plan approval, then you are out of the city does not provide solid waste pickup. That as part of that site plan approval, there was a plan that was articulated by the developer about how they were going to handle solid waste as a contracted or outside of the city service.
So probably more than we have time for tonight, but I agree that probably needs more discussion, certainly more data behind it to understand what percentage of our population isn't actually receiving these services, and then for what the cost might be to split that cost up.
Okay, any other council request? Excuse me. Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. The Recs and Parks Department are to be congratulated on opening the playground Cherry Hill Park. It gets a lot of use, and so it also is starting to accumulate odd kinds of trash, which I try to pick up when I walk my dog in the morning, but it's there's more the next day, which is okay. I can help out with that until I get tired of helping out with that. My larger question, though, is I'm sure you have an answer to this. The playground equipment extends well beyond the borders of the construction. It extends to down trees and branches and all kinds of things that are not being arranged creatively by the children that play there. And I'm just wondering whether that and broken light and other things will be addressed soon. I guess it's really kind of, it does look trashy.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Shields, do you have a report to give us tonight?
I
as
do.
well?
If there are, I'd like to report on 2 items, and then as the third item, I'd like to invite Lee Goldstein, our project manager for the West Falls Church Economic Development Project, to provide the council with an update on that project. So the 2 things I'd like to report on. First, each year the Employee Review Board, which is chaired by Mr. Jerry Barrett, considers applications for Employee of the Year. And they made their selection just last week, and so I'm very pleased to announce that Ibi Acosta was chosen by the Employee Review Board as the city's Employee of the Year, which is our highest honor. And we'll have an opportunity on May 14th to celebrate Ms. Acosta's service and this highest recognition. We had a nice kind of quiet presentation of the award last week, right in the midst of the move of the last, actually not the last, but the last sort of major group of employees that moved from the City Hall project to 400 North Washington. And Ms. Acosta has been right at the center of that planning effort and helping us all make that move successfully. And that's a transition to the other item that I'd like to report on. As of today, the city manager's office, finance, the registrar of voters, IT, and OCOM, and the city attorney have made the transition from City Hall to 400 North Washington Street. So the remaining folks at City Hall is our chief of police, and 1 or 2 other people, and dispatch. And so they are keeping the lights on, and they will move out in about 2 weeks, and then the building will be completely turned over for the renovation and expansion. Whenever you make a move like this, it is a big effort, so I just want to thank our IT services. They've been very focused on making that transition smoothly for us. Kyle Kling with Department of Public Works, James Mack, our project manager, and Robert Goff, Joe Dowling, and all of our folks at Public Works who've helped us make that move. It went pretty well, and I think everybody's in pretty good spirits. And so now we're reunited with everybody at 400 North Washington Street. So for the public, essentially all of our public-facing services now are located at 400 North Washington Street. There is parking available there, and I think it's a pretty user-friendly experience for people who are going to get building permits, pay their taxes, or access planners, talk with zoning, any of the services that people typically come to City Hall to receive. For court services, now this is old news because our clerk of court has been relocated to the county courthouse there at 1425 North Courthouse Road for over 3 or 4 weeks now. But if you have to pay a ticket or get something handled for the clerk, you need to go to the Arlington County Courthouse. Human Services is at the Gage House, and our police operations is at the property yard. Those are the major places where all of our functions are. But council, thank you for your support as we've gone through this move, and so we'll be there for the next 8 months is when we ought to be moving back to a new renovated and expanded City Hall. So with those 2 items on my report, now if I could turn it over to Mr. Goldstein to come forward and provide you with an update on the campus project.
Good evening, Council. So as you all know, we had a successful release of the request for conceptual proposals on March the 1st, and subsequent to that, we held an industry forum, which was a pre-response conference for potential proposers on March the 14th at the Northern Virginia Center. Many of you were there. Thank you for your participation. We had about 50 attendees turn out to that event. We had a presentation, a lot of questions and answers, and a site tour. And so we are now responding to some of those questions in writing. We're posting it for respondents to view. A lot of questions about coordination with the school. Dr. Newman is here. Last Friday, we had our second campus coordinating committee meeting in which we discussed issues around site infrastructure, as well as the upcoming RFDP process. And so we're on target still to put out a request for detailed proposals. We're thinking mid-June. And right now we're looking to formulate the evaluation committee for the conceptual proposals to determine which teams will be down selected to compete for the detailed proposal stage. In addition, we're still working on some infrastructure reports, the ALTA survey. We should have a draft of that very shortly to provide proposers, as well as a sewer capacity study that our Department of Public Works is working on. I also met with Corey Weiss of the Environmental Sustainability Council about potentially coordinating on some of these tours to make sure we get that information in front of the CCC and the Planning Commission and EDA to incorporate into the RFDP stage. And as was mentioned before, we hope that the RFDP will allow another bite at the apple for these boards and commissions and the City Council to weigh in and get more detailed information for proposers to respond to. So.
All right, thank you much. Are there any questions? Thank you for your continued good work, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
The question. Thanks for that. In terms of the questions that have been coming in to procurement, to Jim Wise, to you guys, it's been pretty high volume in terms of follow-up questions at this point?
We had about 20, 25 questions or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
All right, thanks much. Keep us posted. All right, why don't we move on to business on the agenda? Madam Clerk, and let me ask the city attorney, can we call these items together, or do we need to do for state code requirements, need to do anything particular since this is a budget matter?
Since you're not holding a public hearing, I mean, you can have the public speak, but there's not an official public hearing tonight, so it's not critical, but you will need to ultimately vote on each one separately.
Understood.
But
So, but we
you
can't
could
call.
call them together and discuss them all at the same time.
Why don't we just go ahead and call them together, and then we can have the discussion
Okay.
kind of in segments. Madam
Yeah.
Clerk?
Yes, we have first readings on TO 18-02, ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures and revenues, appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2019 general fund, school operating fund, school community service fund, and school food service fund, cable access fund, sewer fund, and stormwater fund. We have TO 18-03, ordinance fixing and determining the FY 2019 to FY 2024 capital improvements program, budget, and appropriating expenditure and revenue funds for the fiscal year 2019. And we have TO 18-04, ordinance setting the rate of tax levy on real estate for tax year 2019 and on personal property, machinery, and tools, and all other property segregated by law for local taxation in the City of Falls Church, Virginia for tax year 2018.
Okay, thank you. Before we get started, I have a disclosure I'd like to read. I have consulted with the city attorney and want to make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 18-02, TO 18-03, and TO 18-04. The proposed budget and tax rate items on tonight's agenda. My wife is employed by the Falls Church City School System, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons that may be affected by the FY 2019 budget. However, I can participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Vice Mayor Connolly?
I have also consulted with the city attorney, and I want to make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 18-02, TO 18-03, and TO 18-04, the proposed budget and tax rate items on tonight's agenda. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore am a member of a group of 3 or more persons that may be affected by the FY 2019 budget. I can participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. The three items before the council are before you for first reading. They reflect the ordinances that would implement the presentation that I gave 2 weeks ago and was joined by the chairman of the school board and the superintendent for the school portion of the budget. Since 2 weeks ago, when this was first presented to you, we've had a Sunday town hall, which was well attended, and we had a work session last week on March 19th. Just by way of overview, the capital improvements program would require a new appropriation of $2.4 million, which is the equivalent of 6 cents on the tax rate. That's very much aligned with the numbers that we discussed last summer when the CIP was adopted and the numbers that were used as part of the public referendum for the high school project. The operating budget has a growth of 1.7% for general government, 2.8% growth in the school transfer, and because we have had respectable and strong economic growth in the city, our organic revenues are growing just over 4%. So those operating budgets alone would allow for a 3-cent reduction in the operating budget. WMATA is an item that we are still wrestling with, but it would require a 2.5-cent increase on the tax rate. So the budget ordinances that are before you do have a request for a 5.5-cent increase to the real estate tax rate. All other rates and taxes remain, rates and taxes in the city remain unchanged. So going forward, we plan to have a work session on April 2nd. That will be an intensive work session on the operating budget. We will focus on general government operations, and we will organize our presentations around the adopted vision principles and the council work plan. So what we will not do, and we don't intend to do, is provide sort of a deep run through the departmental budgets department by department, but instead to provide presentations to you about sort of the high-level strategic objectives of the budget, what is funded, what's not funded, so the council can really have a good awareness of where this budget is taking us in terms of steering the ship of state towards the adopted planning principles that you have considered in the past year and are considering right now in terms of your 2-year work plan. On April 8th, we'll have our second Sunday town hall on the budget. On April 9th, we plan to, and that'll be a regular meeting, April 9th, we plan to spend a greater focus on the capital improvements program to go through the projects and the ways and means of how those projects will be funded. And then lastly, April 16th is an open work session. It's completely unprogrammed at this point so that the council can address final markup, requests for changes to the budget, and April 23rd is the scheduled date for final consideration. So that's an overview of sort of the major elements of the budget and the schedule that we've had up to this point and the schedule we plan to have going forward. We don't plan to do a walkthrough of the responses to questions tonight. We'd be happy to discuss those with you, but we just handed them out tonight, and so we can also address those at our work session on April 2nd. But if you do have any questions of those, we'll certainly try to answer those. So Ms. Bawa, myself, Dr. Noonan are here really to respond to any other questions that you might have at this time as best we can.
I think, I'm sorry, what did you hand out? I don't think I got that.
So what was handed out at the beginning of the meeting are a couple of documents. First was a response to questions with a document that looks like this. So this has responses to the first round of questions, which came out of the March 12th meeting, and then starting at question 13 and forward, those are the questions that came out of the March 19th meeting. In addition to that, there are 2 attachments to those questions relating to the city's classification plan and the police class plan. And then lastly, I do want to bring to your attention this memo that is the Housing and the Human Services Advisory Council, their recommendations for funding community service fund applications. And the total amount funded through those, which is built into the budget, is $83,400. And the projects that are listed in that memo have gone through their vetting process and are their recommendations for funding. Typically, for this memo, when the council adopts the budget, that is an implicit agreement with these funding recommendations, and no further action is requested by the council on that.
Did you hand that memo out as well?
Yes, so that was in the stack that was handed out tonight.
I don't think I got that one either.
Okay, so yeah, this just came to me from the HSAC committee, and so I wanted to make sure the council got that. So,
Okay.
if I,
Maybe it's in my stack here and I can't find it, but I don't see it. So I'll just get a copy of it eventually. Don't need it right this instant. Okay.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
I know that the WMATA situation is changing every day, so I was hoping to get an update or what's the latest on reading the tea leaves on what Richmond's going to do.
it's really not significantly changed since our last discussion a week ago because the General Assembly has not met since then. What has happened since then is the NVTA has written a letter, and so one question that staff has and Councilmember Snyder asked that we relate to the council is that we have a discussion of that NVTA letter, so that's one more piece of paper that we'll distribute, and maybe towards the end of the meeting there could be a discussion of whether the council wants the city to draft a letter under our own letterhead to the governor on WMATA funding. I think the principles in the NVTA letter, we contributed to the drafting of that letter. I think they're sound, so our letter would be fairly similar to that NVTA letter, probably with a few specific points city focused.
All right, other questions?
Yeah, we should have extra.
Mr. Duncan?
I'm sorry, I thought we were going to talk about WMATA a little bit more. Excuse me. So, I think it's important for the public to understand that, you know, we really just don't know what's going to go on with WMATA and probably won't know until, at best, 2 weeks before we have to cast our final budget vote. To the degree that anybody in the public wants to make their views known on the WMATA and distribution of local funds for local projects, does staff have any recommendations about to whom they direct those concerns down in Richmond? In other words, you know, people are writing us saying, we want money for this, money for that, money for the other, and that money might be available if things broke our way in Richmond. So I would be inclined to want to tell folks to contact somebody in Richmond with their interests and concerns.
I think two key areas. One would be to address comments to the governor, and on his website there is how to submit comments, and then also to our Senator Dick Sassaw and Delegate Marcus Simon. And anybody's welcome to reach out to me if they need assistance finding the emails. I think the General Assembly will definitely have to work with the governor's budget, and we've submitted, as you see with the NBTA letter and other outreach, the request for them to put more state money on the table versus local. So having our citizens' voices as well as yours heard down in Richmond would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. Funding of WMATA came up the last council session and for last year's budget, and As I recall at that time, the what's been acronymized, the acronym CFA, which I think stands for Comprehensive Funding Agreement.
Capital financing agreement, yep.
Or something like that. It had expired, and we subsequently reapproved it later that summer. And I understand that it's due to expire again if it hasn't already. And that agreement says that we'll participate in funding, well, basically whatever WMATA asks us to do. So it's no secret that the 2.5 cent contribution to WMATA out of the 5.5 cent increase requested is the large mammal in this room. And of the $500 million that WMATA has asked for, DC has approved in full measure their portion. Maryland has as well. So it then falls to this this Commonwealth to do what they said they were going to do if they ever reconvene and do that. Sorry about the fractured English, but I think you get my drift. So if that happens and we approve a 5.5 cent increase to tax rate, then I'm mindful that if we don't have to spend it on funding WMATA, then the question is unresolved about what happens to this money. I mean, that's perhaps a good problem to have. But on the other hand, if we don't include it going forward, and it turns out that we have to pay for it, are there mechanisms such as a supplemental budget that we could pass downstream once we figure out what Richmond's going to do?
I think the short answer is no. We would be stuck with the amount of funding that we have, and we'd have to figure it out. So it's an unfortunate dimension of this. Local governments everywhere are trying to adopt our budgets, and when the General Assembly acts on time, things work well. When the General Assembly does not act on time, that's when we're all in difficulty, and that's where we are right now.
Okay. There are probably other additional technical questions that I want to pose. I'll do that offline with regard to what the CFA stipulates, and perhaps I'll be able to catch the city attorney before she goes off on vacation. Thank you.
I just had another WMATA question. Okay. I think it's probably in the Q&A, but I haven't had a chance to look through the details since we just got it. But one of the questions I had before was, if we need to fund WMATA at 2.5 cents, or hopefully better than 2.5 cents, should we expect this indefinitely? That's the funding agreement kind of in Virginia. And if so, I know that there was also some talk of the fiscal cliff, which is kind of unrelated to WMATA. It's with all the other transit systems in Virginia where we're essentially going to be left with a big bill to pay come 2020, which unfortunately coincides with when we're taking on one of our first big debt tranches, and when our debt to expenditures number actually exceeds the 12%. So if we have a sense of, projecting out not only our debt service impacts, but also our WMATA impacts, I think that's important to kind of think about the next 3 to 5 years being really critical in terms of how much money we're going to be in the hole for.
Question 14 on page 6 of the question responses provides that information. And when you look at the bottom line, which gets to the year 2021, there's a projected $913,000 increase over FY 2020 in that year, unless the state plugs the hole from the transit fiscal cliff. So this is what we have talked about in the past, and this is where it shows up in numbers. And there's a lot of numbers in this table, so if you just go straight to the bottom line, that's kind of where you get to that point. Ms. Messer probably has the latest information on that. I think the situation in the out years is, right now we're thinking, is not as dire as this, because there are efforts to try to plug that hole of the fiscal cliff. But maybe briefly, just a little bit of an update on that, since it is 2 years out.
Consistent with the efforts to fund WMATA and the overall transit, the General Assembly has approved and Governor pending signing with all of the WMATA transit discussions an additional $50 million match to the federal PRIA, which will extend the cliff by 1 year, because they've also appropriated or authorized appropriations of bonding. So it'll push it out by 1 year to FY 2022, as things stand right now, with a commitment to revisit the issue again in the next session.
So this is increasing beyond what we're already proposing to need to pay for WMATA.
It would reduce the cliff would be delayed for another year.
But these increases in the subsidy, so it's assuming worst case 2.5 cents now, and then we're saying, well, 900,000 more in 2020, that's another 2.5 cents or so.
If nothing changes here, we don't get the cliff extension and we don't get the additional state money that we are anticipating in the pending bill.
So this is comparable to just put in context of kind of the impact we're talking about for paying for the $120 million bond for high school, right? So 5 cents to pay for transit, kind of coinciding with the years we're actually taking out the bonds.
This would reduce if the $154 million does become in play for WMATA.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
I guess where I'm trying to get my head at is between now and the next, 3 or 4 weeks, we may or may not know in much specificity where the WMATA situation stands. Staff is working it hard, Mr. Snyder's working it hard. Vice Mayor and I, called in to the mayor's phone call last Thursday and shared our views about how important it was for us locally to have some certainty about this as soon as possible. Governor certainly seemed, understanding of that. But we really won't know much probably until April the 15th or so. The session starts back on the 11th, is that right? That's
Correct.
The earliest probably we would know something, which is only a week or so before we have to pass our budget. So I guess as we, to me, that gives us, an opportunity to talk about some of these other needs that have been expressed in the community by the schools, by Affordable Housing Group, by tax relief and abatement folks, neighborhood traffic calming, other things that are in the budget that we'll talk about in more detail in the work session. So I guess, what would be helpful is as every week goes by, if there's anything you can do to just show us a band of expectations. You've described $2.5 million as 2.5 cents as your worst case scenario. So maybe in a week you've got a not quite as bad case scenario. It's not going to get any worse than 2.5 cents. It could get a little better, could get more better. And to the degree it gets more better, then, more people are going to be happy with the budget that we finally pass, whether that's related to resources or the tax rate or both. My personal hope is that, because things do seem to be moving in a direction, all the jurisdictions are, playing ball with WMATA now, that's good. The federal bill, as I understand it, allocates money to Metro, that's good. What we really have to work out is this kind of NVTA local money issue, which the governor has some things he can do in terms of other sources of revenues, and if he can persuade the legislature to go along with him, then we could be in a significantly better position than the worst case scenario that you've very responsibly laid out. So, try to, as we can, attach some sort of dollar figures to how less bad it might be getting as we go through our budget consideration process.
Okay. Other comments about WMATA or anything else of note? Sure, Vice Mayor Conley.
Thank you for answering all the questions that I emailed on our snow day with my free time. I had lots of time to read the budget. I have another set of questions that I'm not going to ask all tonight because there's a lot of them, but we'll email them further. One of the questions I have that somebody asked me that I'm curious about, the stormwater staff that we have, do we pay them out of the stormwater fund or do they come out of the general operating fund, or is it a little bit of both?
There are, I think, 3 positions that are funded entirely out of the Stormwater Fund, and there are several other positions like the Director of Public Works, an engineer position that are partially covered by the General Fund and partially covered by the Stormwater Fund.
Okay, so were they new positions when we added the Stormwater Fund? Or was that
No.
when we got rid of the Water Department as well?
It did happen the same year, and so essentially what was done is that we moved the costs. We had been maintaining our stormwater system, but when the utility was created, we provide a higher level of service, so we actually increased staff, and we moved staff that had been either on the Water Fund or the General Fund to the Stormwater Fund.
So I'll just email you the rest because there's way too many to ask right now. Thank you.
Go for it, Phil.
So yeah, this piece of paper you just handed us, haven't had a chance to read it yet, obviously, but question number 3 speaks to the Treasurer's Office, which is evaluating the current tax relief and abatement program. Will bring forward an ordinance with proposed changes. So do you expect that to be, packaged into our discussion next week? So that we could consider what the Treasurer has told us? To recap briefly, my understanding was that Arlington's program in this area has a much higher income threshold, much more generous income threshold, and a lower assets threshold, which is interesting. I don't know any history about that, don't know why it is, would like to get information on it, and I have some notion of how much it would cost for us to approach Arlington in our effort in that area. I won't say become equivalent to Arlington, but so is that something you foresee being able to do in the next week or so?
Yes, so the Treasurer will be at the work session on the 2nd, and we'll have a more detailed discussion of that matter. So under the vision principle, it's under affordable and inclusive community, and so that's
Nice.
where that will fall.
Good vision words. And similarly, and I haven't flipped through this whole thing yet, the business of Affordable Housing Fund, the things that were discussed here tonight, is that another area that we expect to have data on next Monday? And then finally, the Neighborhood Traffic Calming Program, which is included in the budget at some level of effort. That's also tied up with the WMATA money, because if things don't break our way, then some of the money that we're hoping to use for neighborhood traffic calming is going to get pulled away, without going into the details. That's something else we don't know, but if things broke more favorably our way, then what's in your budget might represent a level of effort that is okay. If we could do better, again, if your scenario said, here's a less bad scenario out of WMATA, could we discuss allocating more effort to neighborhood traffic calming? The report that CACT gave us about the number of communities, neighborhoods that are in the queue for neighborhood traffic calming consideration, is that laid over with what you're proposing to do in this budget year in a way that we could say, well, geez, if we had another $100,000, we could do 1 or 2 more, say, light versions of communities? Is that the kind of discussion we could have based on the information that you would have at hand next week?
We're going to have a lot of ground to cover, so I think a big challenge is going to be how much detail we can have given the amount of ground we want to cover on a program by program basis. But yes, we are planning to talk about that program. And the basic numbers to think about is we have about $600,000 of NVTA 30% money funding the NTC and a whole host of other city projects. We're going to lose 100,000 of that. So about 20% of that money is going to go away under the proposal to fund WMATA. Or it won't go away, it'll go to WMATA instead of staying here. That's what we'll have to wrestle with.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you.
Mr. Z, did you have a question? Okay, well, let's see if, first off, let's welcome Mr. Snyder, who I understand was away on business travel, and see if he might have, I know you're kind of jumping right into the fire, but we're discussing budget. I don't know if there's any unresolved questions that you have.
So I want to thank everybody. I just got back from a business trip and arrived at DC at 8:30, so that's worked well. But I didn't travel as far to get here as you did.
Yeah, it's starting to hit me pretty hard, I got to tell you. I basically was in transit for about, I think, 24 hours. I got in late this afternoon. So anyway, Mary Beth agreed to kick me to the table if I fall asleep. So no disrespect. But do you have any questions for Mr. Shields or any comments for?
Oh, I got lots of questions. No, I've looked at things and I'm good for right now. We've got lots of opportunities to continue to work on things in the next few weeks. So thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
I just had a process issue. So I know that we're all sending in our comments to staff. Before Monday, like, I want to be respectful of staff's time on this. Like, when do you want questions? Like, is there a deadline that you want all questions before the next work session, just so that we're respectful of everyone's time and how much time it takes to produce good answers as well?
Thursday by noon would be ideal.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Z, you sound like you had a motion.
Mayor, I move passage of TO 18-02, TO 18-03, and TO 18-04.
Okay, and those will need to be voted on separately, but the motion can operate as a motion to all three at the same time.
Yes, as long as you take up each one separately to vote.
Okay.
Do
All right.
we need to read the motion that says to grant first reading and schedule the public hearings?
I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't listen closely enough to what Mr. Z stated. I thought there is a full motion on there with the public hearings, et cetera, setting the public hearings and all. So
Oh, I'm
if you
sorry,
could-
yes.
You just read one of them and put in all three numbers.
Can I put all that 3D? All right, let's see. I gotta find it then. 3. Well, they're all the same, right? I move to grant first reading TO 18-02, 03 and 04. Schedule public hearings for April 9th and April 23. Schedule second reading for April 23, 2018, and advertise the same according to law.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh.
Arm wrestle.
All right,
No, I give up.
so who's got the suit?
Is that
We'll
Ms.
call-
Hardy?
We'll call her Ms. Hardy.
Okay.
All right, so.
I'll win the next one.
Let's have, so we have a motion, it's been seconded. Before we get to a vote, I'm going to open it to public comment. If there's anyone who wishes to speak to any of these matters, you're certainly welcome to do so. We just ask you fill out the speaker slip. Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. And before we get to our own vote as well, are there any comments that folks have about the motions on the table? Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, just a clarification from the city attorney about the nature. I've done this a few times before, but just so the public understands fully, this is simply a vote. The motion that relates to the advertising of the tax rate is simply a vote to run an advertisement in the newspaper. It is not a vote which is on the substance of what any individual member might or might not feel they wanted to do about setting the tax rate when we have a final vote. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct, except to the extent you're granting first reading to these, that sets not necessarily where you want to set the tax rate, but what you want to advertise. And so that sets a range for where the tax rate would ultimately be set. But you're correct that this vote simply allows advertisement and sets public hearings so that a range of numbers could be considered ultimately for second reading.
Okay, and when you speak to a range, so the advertisement, does it include not only the ceiling number, but also a number that is reflective of what the tax rate would be you know, how I'm going to try to finish this sentence. I'm not sure quite how to say it, but the non-adjusted tax rate, what's the phrase that,
Well, I think it just sets a maximum tax rate that you could adopt.
so it doesn't
Is that-
speak to, you know, what the tax rate would be if we funded the budget at the current year's effort? That's not a number that's in the advertisement.
I think, are you talking about it's like, it advertised the lowered rate necessary to offset increased assessment, and the ad will also say the effective rate of the increase.
Yeah, it's the former
Is that-
number that I'm, yeah, right. So the advertisement does include that.
Yes, it's required by state law,
Right.
and it will,
Do we know what that number is for this advertisement?
do you want, I have it.
We can look it up, because we have.
This
it
is,
in that.
I have the ad in front of me.
Figured you would.
So let's see, effective rate increase, the tax rate of 138.5 per $100 of assessed value. The difference between the lower tax rate and the proposed rate would be .087 per $100, or 6.7%. This difference will be known as the effective tax rate increase. Is that what you're looking for?
So the .087 would be subtracted from the 138?
Just to make it simpler, the current rate is 1.33,
Mhm.
and this ad would essentially put a cap of 1.385.
Mm-hmm.
And so the lowered rate necessary to offset increased assessment, the tax rate, which would levy the same amount of real estate tax as last year when multiplied by the new total assessed value of real estate with the exclusions mentioned above, which
Mhm.
is another part of the ad, would be 1.298 per $100 of assessed value.
That's the
This rate will be known as the lowered tax rate.
lowered tax rates. This basically is an advertisement that the tax rate, you know, could be as low as 129.8, could be as high as 138.5. Stay tuned for, you know, later developments to see what it's going to end up being by the time we vote on April 23rd.
Right.
That a fair way to say it? Okay, thanks.
That's correct.
Sorry, I didn't know all the terms of art, but that's helpful in getting me where I want to be. The only other question I had was, I know we spent a lot of time in our conversations comparing ourselves to other jurisdictions, near and far, big and small. In reading about the Arlington County Board's discussion that we're having right now, setting the tax rate, it was interesting to me to note that they had a closely divided vote, a 3-2 vote, on between two choices for what tax rate they would advertise, a lower number and a higher number. And they advertised the lower number in the end on a 3-2 vote. I've not had a chance to talk with anybody in Arlington County, but I'd be interested. Tonight, I intend to vote to advertise the motion that Mr. Z made. I would be interested to know, as we compare ourselves to Arlington in so many ways, what the thinking was that the county had, the majority of the county board had, as to why they advertised the lower rate. You know, was it, I mean, I know they're going through a certain amount of reining in, discipline, tightening the reins on spending. But I just thought it was interesting that a sister body close to us took a direction that's, I think, different from where we're going today. I'd just like to know, going forward in future years, why they did that, what went into their thinking. Okay, thanks.
All right, other comments or questions? Ms. Hardy and then Mr. Snyder.
So my sense is that they're facing just as many uncertainties as we are. So not knowing, they're impacted by WMATA, they're impacted by kind of the looming recession. So I think while we have all these unknowns, I think it seems irresponsible to me to advertise anything lower than the 5.5 cents, given that we don't know how much worse. We know it can't get much worse than the worst case scenario. So I think that's why I would support this tonight. But I am disappointed that we don't have several high priority items that we discussed in the visioning and work plans, like the tax abatement for seniors, a more aggressive expansion of that program, the affordable housing funding, sidewalks. I think there's other things in there that I wish would have been funded. So I know it's not going to be easy to make a bunch of the trade-offs in the budget, but I do hope that with hopefully the WMATA numbers getting better, and actually in a flat student enrollment year and nearly 4% revenue growth, that's really the perfect storm for operating budgets. I don't think it's going to get any better than that. And so I think, I hope we do come well below 5.5 cents come the end of April, but my hope is that we'll make some trade-offs along the way so that we can fund some of those important needs and keep in mind those future unknowns I think that are out there.
All right, other Mr. Lichtenhouse. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Snyder was next, I believe. Okay, I'll ask. Just a point of clarification again. Approve the 5.5. The WMATA situation gets better, even if the 5.5 is what is approved. So we are essentially left with, I don't want to call it a surplus, but saved money, the WMATA situation not being as bad as it is. What are we legally obligated to do if there is that cushion because we didn't incur that anticipated cost from WMATA? Because there is a timing issue, right, in terms of what the states, Maryland, D.C., Virginia are voting on and the timing of our approval.
Yes, so if you approve the 5.5 increase and then things turn out to be better for WMATA, I think you would have the opportunity to make changes to your budget and use that money for other things, because currently that money would be appropriated for the WMATA spending that you then wouldn't need to do.
I stated this the last time also. I do feel that by April 23rd, we're going to have sufficient clarity that we'll have the number that we think is going to be needed. I think that after April 11th, or fairly soon after that, we're going to have enough clarity that the MVTC will run the numbers and tell us what our share is. Right now, they've done it sort of notionally, but it's very, there's so many things still at play that that's kind of where we are right now.
Let me, just for my own purposes, I want to simplify it as much as possible in my mind. If we approve the 5.5, and let's assume it's not figured out by then, and we find out that we don't need those 2.5, are we obligated to build a budget around the 5.5 that was approved? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, so the tax rate will be set, and so there's no changing that. In your budget, there's an appropriation for WMATA that will be smaller than what you approved. And so that will be the thing that there can't be any other changes to appropriations without the council formally acting on it. So if that were to happen, which again, I don't think is going to happen, we would come back and have that conversation with the council about what you would want to do about it.
But it doesn't mean we go back and change the 5.5. That's what I'm trying to get at. Meaning, if we find out that's better, do we come back and say, well, we voted for the 5.5, the situation's better, we actually don't need to raise taxes 5.5 cents? Maybe that was the way I should have worded that question. Or is that ship sailed once we do the 5.5, regardless of timing?
I have to verify. I believe there is a way to amend that tax rate at some point.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if we approve 5.5 and we find out we don't need it, can we legally go back and say, because of the timing, the WMATA situation, what is it, as bad as we thought, so we don't need the 5.5. Sorry, folks, it's only going to be 4 or 4.5. That's what I'm trying to get at.
I will have to I can get with you all tomorrow I can verify that for tomorrow and make sure everybody understands before you move forward.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot. So I'll support the motion because I think the 5.5 is a reasonable platform right now. I think we will put in a lot more work on this budget between now and final approval. I have no doubt about that. A couple things on WMATA. I think we took a major step last week where we and Loudon actually were the prime movers, and it was a very good conversation, actually. So that's a major step, but there are still some other steps to take, and I'm hopeful we can move through, but it just, we don't know and we can't count on it right now. This morning's news that we were indicated that we were the #1 healthiest community in America is partly the result of prior councils. It's been a team effort. Our boards and commissions, our staff, our council have had clear values, and we provided strong services and strong schools. And I think those are, in large measure, the reason why we've got the kind of positive recognition that we did. So I'm not about to change that formula now. But I do think we need to look at some things. Are there some prudent adds we ought to make? But I still will have first and foremost driving down that rate between now and final approval, if at all possible, again, consistent with our values, maintaining services and maintaining our schools. So that's really all I had to say tonight, so thanks.
Thanks. Any other comments before we move to a vote?
I'm sorry, just one other question, another data point. So the Consumer Price Index, which is issued monthly, is, a number that I'd looked at late last year pretty closely in trying to set our guidance that the council voted on in December. That time it was running about, annualized at 1.9%, as I recall. Since then, the economy has, I guess, picked up a little bit, at least in terms of the measurements that CPI picks up, and I think the January number is 2.1, February is 2.2. At least one more of those should come out, I think, before we have to vote on the budget. It would be helpful to, I think, know what the CPI is, just in gauging the compensation packages that, both the manager and the school superintendent have presented, to see where they stand compared to national benchmarks. So I would ask for that to be on our radar screen. And in future years, since so much of what we talk about is salary, that's what I've come to fully appreciate. We talk about a lot of things, but particularly on the school side, but even on the city side, so much is about salary. We really need to spend structurally more time focused on what the CPI is and what we can reasonably expect to tell our employees to anticipate in terms of pay raise year in and year out. If we're, way above what the CPI is and what we are leading people to expect to receive, then I think council needs to, that's a policy decision that council really needs to be involved with and in front of, so that we don't end up getting out beyond our supply lines.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments before we move to a vote? I would just say for myself that I will support this measure, but it's my hope that we can lower the rate as we move along this season. Madam Clerk, will you call the vote, please? And do we need to do these on each individually? All right, so why don't we go ahead and why don't you give us a little guidance on that? Does the clerk need to call each one individually then?
Yes, you do, and take the vote on each one individually.
And I'll just call the title of the TO number?
Yeah, the TO number.
Okay.
For each one.
Okay, so we're doing TO 18-02, which is the budget ordinance. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And for TO 1803, which is the CIP, Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And TO 1804 is the tax rate. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder? Mr. Z?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And those three motions carry unanimously.
All right, let's keep moving. What do we got next? It's consent agenda? Is that right?
There are minutes that didn't make it to the paper agenda, but you do have them, and they're
I've got a
online.
liaison report.
Okay, we'll get to that in just
Got
a
it.
moment. Let's do the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda? It doesn't look like there's anything there, so we don't have a consent agenda. Okay, any business not on the agenda, including council liaison reports? Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yep, so just reporting on the Library Board as trustees, been in discussions with them related to the library project construction renovation. Did want to get back with you all and let you know that they are still collecting numbers related to council's request to delineate between the cost of closing and not closing the library during renovation. And once the CMAR is formalized, construction manager at risk, they'll have those numbers. So we are working on that, but we won't have that until late summer, early fall. But that is the trustees' expectation that they will come back to council with that information. They also wanted to mention that there is commitment to stay on budget. They have certainly driven towards that goal and want to make sure and put clear direction in everyone they've been speaking with that this is the budget, so they are committed to that. I also asked them in our last trustee meeting to consider incentivizing contractors to finish early and under budget, which is a similar approach I think that we've taken with the school project. So that's something they're looking at. There is a commitment in terms of design to incorporate more shared spaces and outlets related to programming, community events there. They want it to be a technology-enabled library, but fewer screens. Still determining where the entrance to the library is going to be, whether it's going to be at the corner there or if it will be front-facing to the street where it's located today. And then there was a discussion related to parking, and this is a request that I have for Mr. Shields and the city attorney, that if we could dust off discussions related to the parking arrangement with 303, is that next door, 303 Park Avenue next door? If we could take a look at parking discussions there. I know with conversations that I've had with the board that own the office condos next door, they would certainly be willing to entertain discussions around leased parking spaces, some type of formal parking structure, because I do understand that there has been a bit of a, I don't want to say there's a formal understanding, but also turn a blind eye to some extent the way that their parking has been used next door. But I can imagine that that goodwill may be completely diluted once we get closer to construction and there's a lot of debris and less parking next door. So I'd like to talk about that, and one of the things that I had committed to the Board of Trustees to help them figure out that parking situation before the construction starts, to make sure that we don't overextend our welcome and how the parking spaces are used with the building next door. Any questions from anyone on council related to the library project?
Well, I'd say if the city's having discussions with the neighboring property about parking, I think construction staging would be part of that as well. I imagine, I don't know, but I would guess that you need to stage the construction materials, et cetera, somewhere during the construction. I don't know if that's been considered yet, but that'd probably be where I would, I don't know where else you put it. So that's something else to think about. Thank you. All right, what else do we have on this? Anything other? Mr. Z?
Oh, this is a quick one. The Washington COG, Council of Governments, Chesapeake Bay Water Quality Policy Committee met last Friday. And at that time, we did not have a omnibus bill passed yet, which was done this week. And so for those that don't know, the full funding was restored for the Chesapeake Bay effort, nearly $81 million. So
good work.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
I just had three quick kind of liaison reports. On the EDA, I think everyone has heard about the downtown plaza already. They're currently getting that rebid so that estimates come in cheaper. It's still in our CIP as is, and I don't think it'll come back to us because I think they're really trying to value engineer it down to kind of the agreed on price. The other thing the EDA is funded is $10,000 towards addition of parking in downtown, so being able to do the paint on the other side of Park Avenue and Maple that we've kind of seen plans for. So that should be good news, and I think we're all hoping that it can be done this spring. On housing, I'm not going to talk about affordable housing, given that we've talked about it a lot tonight already. And then our arts and humanities, something that I know that's come up on several of our council walking tours, is actually public art on those utility boxes. So I'm hoping that we can actually get something done. So it's traffic signal boxes, those big metal cabinets. We've talked about public art in arts and humanities now for 2.5 years. And so I would like them painted, wrapped, something, but we're trying to choose 10, hopefully, boxes by this summer that will get some sort of art treatment of some kind. So it will be a nice facelift, a nice way to kind of brand the city, I think, too.
I think it would be nice, too, is to get a mosaic of some kind on some walls. Mosaic, you know, is that the right word? Mural. I'm telling you, it's really late. I'm sorry. Mural. Okay, I got it.
Whatever.
Mural.
We all know what you mean.
No, I think this is just hopefully one of those like low-hanging fruit things. Like we own the boxes, we don't have to get permission from anybody. We can really just do it, and it'll just spark the interest to do public art, mosaics, and public murals. I think usually take longer because it requires permission and art and things. So, but no, I hear you. I think public art's one of those things that we all would like to do, and it's just be nice to kind of brand ourselves as that cool, funky place.
Yeah. Okay, who else? Vice Mayor
The
Conley?
Government Operations Committee meets tomorrow at noon, and we will be discussing the work plan.
And the Economic Development Committee, I think everybody knows this, but just since everybody look at my eyes, the Insight Project at Broad in Washington is coming before council, as I understand it, on April the 9th. They will not be in a work session format on April 2nd, as had earlier been, I don't know, discussed, contemplated, dismissed. Their representatives have talked to several council members individually, and so just hear now, hear this. There will be in our packet for the April 9th meeting the final information that the applicant will provide and the full staff report, so that we would vote on that on Monday, April the 9th. Okay? Public knows that. Everybody knows that. It's a little unusual for us not to have one more work session, but that is the staff recommendation and the applicant preference.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Duncan a question?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah, so what are the commercial components? Do we know? I mean, my issue when the last time it came before us was I didn't know what was going to be there, and yet we were projecting a certain revenue stream, but we didn't know what was going to be there. So is there any more certainty there? Do we know what we're voting on?
I personally, have not had a chance to meet with the applicant to hear the latest. Several other members have. I think staff is the authority on this, so state of play right now is not something that I really can speak to.
The commercial components are a just under 100,000 square foot office building, Class A office building, and 26,000 square feet of retail, which includes 5,000 square feet for Creative Cauldron, a proffer of a minimum of 10,000 square feet of restaurant, a commitment for 6,000 square foot of a specialty grocer with a 24-month clock to achieve a lease for a specialty grocer. And for the retail program, there is a sort of whole host of proffers relating to what that retail program will be and what it won't be. And the prohibited uses include retail service types of uses like gyms, a broker, or other types of office uses that is intended to be pure retail. So that is the a summary of the commercial program for the project. It is approximately 25% of the square footage of the project.
Right, but are there leases in the office building for occupancy? Are there leases for the restaurant? Are there leases, in other words, I know what the plan, but the plan provides basically X, but we don't know when and if it'll be filled. So my question is, what is the degree of certainty about that at this point?
In conversations with the developer, they do believe that 2 stories of the office will be Kidder Capital, and those would be the top 2 stories of the office building. And they expect that really to be kind of the name of the building because of with that tenant. The retail program has been subject to months and months of discussion, and as is generally the case, the developer is not able to name who will be there because it's impossible to get retail leases typically at this stage. The large format grocery tenants were an exception to that rule, and so we've had success in that in the past, but for the size of the retail bays and the types of retail users, that's not possible in this case. The Creative Cauldron agreement we are asking about what the status of that agreement is, and there's not a signed lease yet, but I think they are working in that direction. That is the information that we have.
Okay, anything else?
Just one of the things the EDC talked about, Letty mentioned the striping and so forth. And one thing caught my ear, the manager said, you know, we're so small here, we don't have a lot of things to paint, and it's hard to get us in the queue compared to our bigger jurisdiction. Just made me wonder if, you know, we really went all out for striping, freshening, painting crosswalks. If we did everything, almost everything that we think should be done, would we be able to get a contract big enough that it would catch the attention, and we could not have to wait until kind of off-season, which was what you described as when we usually get the attention of the painting companies. So again, as we discuss, you know, what kind of money we're going to have in this year's budget, if we could expend more effort in a condensed way, you know, could we get a contract big enough that we could do more than we normally would do in any given year in August or whatever?
Yeah, well, that's what we typically do, is try to do all the painting at once, so that it's a contract big enough to get them here for it. And so what the EDA is funded is sort of a small component of what would normally be our painting program for the year. So the question is, can we get that done as a standalone sooner rather than later? And that's what we're trying to do. The other option would be to pull all the painting up right now, but the difficulty with that is that a lot of the painting, you know, there are other things we need to do first. We need to fix, we need to put in the concrete work for the intersection, or we need to do this, that, or the other thing before we do the painting. And so that's the difficulty. That's why we typically do it in August, because all that other work has been done, and then we get all the painting done. But I'm just, when we had that conversation, I was just noting what the difficulty was. It's certainly not impossible, and that's what we're trying to get done.
Okay, is there anything else? Or
Mayor,
Yes.
I may. I just wanted to follow up with the city manager's earlier comment about the MVTA letter. And Mr. Snyder has now arrived. One of the questions is, do we want to do a City of Falls Church specific letter, or just stick with the MVTA regional letter and then work the issue? So I just wanted to close the loop with council, because if we want to do a City of Falls Church specific letter, it needs to go out
Mr. Snyder, your recommendation?
immediately.
All right, why don't you run with that and get a draft prepared with Ms. Messner?
And that'll be circulated to council?
Yes,
Yep.
after you guys square it away. All right, anything else for tonight?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes?
All of the council committee meetings that are during the day will now be at 400 North Washington Street. We do have 2 small meeting rooms, so we'll be having all of our meetings, including the mayor's meeting, GovOps. Your mailboxes will be moved shortly and will be in the community center.
All right, sounds good. What else we have tonight?
Minutes?
None for tonight, are there?
They didn't make it to the paper version, but they're
Oh,
online
okay.
and they're in your package, so.
All right. Equal Eye, Duncan, any changes?
Okay, so we're going to do the minutes.
Sure.
Okay. Line 40, just typo on line 40 for word preservation.
Everyone caught that one.
I know, that's easy. So we're going to
I
move to approve
didn't.
them?
Move to approve.
I didn't catch
All
it.
right.
The
Approve the
minutes.
minutes, April 10th, 2017, as amended.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it.
Thank you.
What else we have?
Mayor, move that we adjourn these proceedings.
Looks like a plan. Let's adjourn.